The community's response continued to grow stronger with each passing moment. A local news reporter who lived just around the corner rushed out of her house, press badge dangling from her neck. She'd been preparing dinner when her neighbor texted about the situation. Now she stood with her professional camera in hand, live streaming the entire scene to her news channel's social media. "We're live on Main Street," she spoke into her phone camera, her voice carrying the professional tone she developed over years of reporting, "where what appears to be an unauthorized police stop of a minor is currently in progress." Her words added another layer of pressure to the already tense situation. The elderly couple who'd been watching from their lawn had brought out folding chairs, making it clear they weren't going anywhere. Their grandson had faced similar treatment last summer in another city, and they'd promised themselves they'd never stand by silently again. Other neighbors followed their lead, some bringing out their own chairs, others simply standing firm with their phones raised. From down the street came the sound of more car doors closing as people from neighboring blocks arrived, drawn by rapid-fire text messages and community group chats. The students' debate team coach appeared, walking quickly toward the scene. He'd received 3 different messages about his star student being harassed, and he wasn't about to stay home. "This young man," the coach announced loudly, joining the lawyer, "maintains a perfect academic record while volunteering to help children learn to read. He's exactly the kind of person we want in this neighborhood." His voice carried the same authority he used in school board meetings, firm and unwavering. The officer's radio crackled again, this time with a specific message. "Unit 247, please respond to dispatch." The sound made him jump slightly, but he didn't reach for the radio. Instead, he continued to stand there, seemingly frozen between pride and the growing realization that he'd made a serious mistake. A minivan pulled up slowly, and out stepped a woman everyone recognized. The PTA president, her face set with determination. She'd helped organize the library's volunteer program and had personally watched this student help countless children improve their reading skills. "I can vouch for him," she called out, joining the growing circle of supporters. "He's at the library twice a week, without fail." The student remained remarkably composed, though his hands had started to tremble slightly. The weight of the moment, both its injustice and the incredible show of community support, was beginning to sink in. But he stood his ground, remembering his parents' words about dignity in the face of prejudice. More phones lit up the growing darkness, their screens like fireflies in the dusk. Someone had started a community livestream, and comments were pouring in from around the neighborhood. The officer's radio buzzed again, more insistent this time. "Unit 247, respond immediately." The lawyer stepped forward once more, his voice clear and measured. "Officer, your supervisor has been contacted. The station is aware of this situation. Multiple community leaders are present and recording. Would you like to explain to all of us why you're detaining this young man?" Through nearby windows, dinner preparations had been abandoned as families gathered to watch. Children pressed their faces against glass panes, witnessing a moment that would shape their understanding of community and justice. Parents held them close, some explaining in whispered voices about the importance of standing up for what's right. The crowd had grown to nearly 30 people now, all silent, all watching, all bearing witness. They weren't just neighbors anymore. They had become a united front against injustice, a living example of community solidarity. Their presence spoke volumes. This wasn't just about one student or one officer anymore. It was about the kind of community they wanted to be. The small roadside diner stood like a lonely lighthouse along the dusty Nevada highway, its neon OPEN sign flickering against the late afternoon sun. Inside, at a corner booth worn smooth by years of travelers, sat an unassuming woman in her early 30s. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a well-loved leather riding jacket that had seen its fair share of miles. As she sipped her third cup of black coffee, her eyes occasionally drifted to her motorcycle parked outside, a meticulously maintained Triumph that gleamed even under the desert dust. The waitress, an older woman with kind eyes and a name tag reading Betty, stopped by to top off her cup. "Long ride ahead?" she asked, noting the woman's riding gear. "Just enjoying the quiet," the rider replied with a small smile. What Betty couldn't know was that this customer had spent years in the world's most elite military unit. As one of the first female Navy SEALs, she had completed missions in places most people couldn't find on a map. But those days were 6 years behind her now, and she preferred to keep it that way. The diner's peaceful atmosphere was perfect for reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. Her fingers absently traced the rim of her coffee cup as she remembered the grueling training, the doubters who said women couldn't make it through BUD/S, and the brothers in arms who had judged her only by her capabilities, not her gender. A small trident tattoo peeked out from under her sleeve, the only visible reminder of her former life. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows, creating patterns on the checkered floor. A few other customers sat scattered around. A trucker hunched over a plate of meatloaf, an elderly couple sharing a slice of pie, and 2 teenagers giggling over chocolate shakes. It was the kind of peaceful scene she had fought to protect, though none of them would ever know it. She checked her phone, noting a message from her old unit buddy about a veterans meetup next month. These days, she channeled her skills into teaching self-defense classes at the local community center, helping others find their inner strength. The work wasn't classified or glamorous, but it brought its own kind of satisfaction. The bell of the diner's door chimed as a family with young children entered, their excited chatter filling the space. She watched them with a subtle smile, remembering why she had chosen this life after leaving the service. Sometimes the quietest moments held the most meaning. Her dog tags still hung around her neck, tucked safely under her shirt, not as a reminder of what she had been, but of how far she had come. The peaceful scene was about to change dramatically, though she didn't know it yet. As she settled her bill, leaving Betty a generous tip, the distant rumble of multiple motorcycles began to grow louder. The sound made the water in her glass ripple slightly, like a scene from an old movie. But unlike the other customers who were starting to look nervous, she remained perfectly calm, her posture relaxed but alert. A habit ingrained through years of training that never quite faded away. Little did anyone know that this ordinary Thursday afternoon was about to become anything but ordinary, as the approaching bikers would soon learn a valuable lesson about judging books by their covers. The sun continued its descent towards the horizon, casting an orange glow through the diner's windows, setting the scene for what would become a local legend. The rumble of motorcycles grew louder, until the whole diner seemed to vibrate. Through the large windows, everyone could see 8 massive bikes pulling into the parking lot, their chrome pipes glinting in the sunset. The riders were an intimidating bunch, all leather, patches, and attitude. Their bikes formed a half circle around the lone Triumph, like wolves surrounding their prey. The bell above the door chimed again, but this time it wasn't the cheerful sound from before. The bikers entered one by one, their heavy boots thumping against the linoleum floor. The peaceful atmosphere in the diner evaporated instantly. The family with young children huddled closer together, and the elderly couple quickly asked for their check. The group's leader stood out, tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and arms covered in faded tattoos. A patch on his vest read "Road Captain," but everyone called him Bear. He scanned the diner like he owned it, his eyes settling on the woman in the corner booth and the motorcycle gear beside her. "Well, well," Bear's voice carried across the diner. "Looks like somebody's lost. That pretty little bike outside yours, sweetheart." His gang members chuckled, spreading out through the diner. Betty, the waitress, stood frozen behind the counter, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her hand. The woman took another sip of her coffee, seemingly unbothered. Her calmness seemed to irritate Bear even more. "You know," he continued, walking closer, "these roads ain't safe for a lady riding alone. All sorts of dangerous types out here." More laughter from his crew. 2 of the bikers slid into the booth across from her, while others leaned against nearby tables. The family with children was trying to leave, but one of the gang members was blocking their path, pretending not to notice. The woman's eyes flickered to them briefly, then back to Bear. "The bike needs a real rider," one of the bikers across from her said, running his fingers through his greasy hair. "How about we take it off your hands? Save you the trouble of getting yourself hurt." The diner had gone completely silent except for the soft country music playing from the old jukebox in the corner. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working, watching through the service window. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman finally spoke, her voice calm and steady. "I appreciate the concern," she said, "but I can handle myself and my bike just fine." There was something in her tone, not fear, not even anger, just pure confidence, that made one of the younger bikers shift uncomfortably. Bear didn't like her response. He planted his hands on her table, leaning down to get in her face. The movement caused his vest to open slightly, revealing something tucked into his waistband. "Maybe you ain't understanding the situation here, darling." What he didn't notice was how her eyes took in every detail. The positions of all 8 men, the nearest exits, the makeshift weapons within reach. Her breathing remained steady, her muscles relaxed but ready. Years of training had taught her to appear completely at ease while being prepared for anything. The young biker who had shifted uncomfortably earlier noticed something else: the way she sat, her perfect posture, how her eyes moved. He'd seen that before during his brief stint in the military. His eyes caught a glimpse of something under her sleeve when she reached for her coffee cup, and his face went pale. The situation was balanced on a knife's edge. Betty had managed to discreetly reach for the phone under the counter, but would help arrive in time. The woman's hand rested calmly on her coffee cup, but her other hand had slipped beneath the table. The sun had dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows through the windows, and everyone in the diner could feel that something was about to break. The tension in the diner reached its breaking point when one of the bikers reached for the woman's leather jacket. In that split second, everything changed. Her hand moved faster than anyone could follow, catching his wrist in a grip that made him gasp. She applied just enough pressure to send a clear message, but not enough to cause real damage. Yet. "I wouldn't," she said quietly. Her voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. The biker tried to pull away, but found himself locked in place by fingers that felt like iron bands. His face reddened, partly from embarrassment, partly from the growing discomfort. Bear's expression darkened. "Let him go," he growled, reaching toward his waistband. The woman's eyes tracked his movement, but she didn't seem afraid. Instead, there was something almost like disappointment in her expression, as if she had hoped for better. The young biker who had noticed her tattoo earlier suddenly spoke up. "Boss, wait." His voice cracked with urgency. "Look at her wrist, the trident. She's a—" But before he could finish, Bear shoved him aside. That was all it took. The woman moved with liquid grace, releasing the first biker's wrist only to redirect Bear's momentum. He stumbled, caught off guard by her technique. 2 other gang members rushed forward, but they might as well have been moving in slow motion. She flowed between them like water, her movements precise and efficient. No wasted energy, no flashing moves, just years of training translated into pure effectiveness. One biker found himself face down on a table, his arm bent at an angle that made him whimper. Another tripped over his own feet trying to back away and landed hard on the diner floor. The elderly couple had their phones out now, recording everything. The truckers at the counter were grinning, enjoying the show. Betty stood with her hand over her mouth, the phone forgotten in her other hand, as she watched this woman dismantle the gang's tough guy image piece by piece. Bear tried to recover, reaching again for what everyone now suspected was a weapon. But she was already there, her fingers finding pressure points that made his arm drop uselessly to his side. She guided him down to one knee, using his own weight against him. "The cops are already on their way," she said, her voice still eerily calm. "So you have a choice. Either we wait for them quietly, or—" She let the sentence hang, but the meaning was clear. The fight had lasted less than 30 seconds, but the diner's dynamic had shifted completely. The young biker who had tried to warn his boss was now backing toward the door, hands raised. "She's a Navy SEAL," he finally managed to say. "I saw the same tattoo during my basic training. She's one of the first women who made it through." A hush fell over the diner. Even the jukebox seemed to pause between songs. The family with children looked down in awe, the kids' eyes wide with wonder. The mother was whispering something about real heroes don't always wear capes. Outside, red and blue lights began to flash against the diner's windows. The woman let out a small sigh, as if this whole situation was more an inconvenience than a threat. She maintained her hold on Bear, who had stopped struggling and now looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. "You know," she said, speaking to all of them, "I came here for coffee and quiet. Next time, maybe just let people enjoy their meals in peace." There was a lesson in her words, delivered without anger or mockery, just simple truth. The sound of police sirens grew louder as the first patrol car pulled into the parking lot. The woman hadn't broken a sweat, hadn't even raised her voice. She looked around the diner, meeting the eyes of the other customers who had witnessed everything. "Sorry about the disturbance," she said, as if she had accidentally knocked over a glass instead of taking down a biker gang. The police officers who walked into the diner weren't quite prepared for what they found. 3 bikers were still on the ground, not hurt, but definitely reconsidering their life choices. Bear, the gang's leader, remained on one knee, his face a mix of pain and embarrassment. And there was the woman, still looking as calm as if she was just finishing up a casual lunch. The lead officer, a veteran cop with 20 years on the force, took in the scene with raised eyebrows. Betty quickly came forward, explaining what had happened. As she spoke, the family with children chimed in, and soon the elderly couple was showing their phone recordings to the officers. "They started it," the little boy from the family announced proudly, pointing at the bikers. "But she was like a superhero." His mother tried to quiet him, but her proud smile said she agreed with her son's assessment. The woman finally released her hold on Bear, stepping back smoothly as the officers moved in. She noticed the young biker who had recognized her tattoo hanging back by the door. Unlike his companions, there was respect in his eyes now, mixed with something that looked like hope. "Ma'am," one of the officers addressed her, notebook in hand, "we'll need your statement." He glanced at the bikers being cuffed and couldn't help adding, "Though I think we've got plenty of witnesses and evidence." Several phones were still recording, capturing every moment. The trucker at the counter finally spoke up, his voice gruff but friendly. "Best entertainment I've had with my meatloaf in years," he chuckled. "Ain't often you see justice served up so neat and tidy." Other customers nodded in agreement, and even some of the kitchen staff had come out to watch. As the officers ran background checks, they discovered several outstanding warrants among the gang members. Bear's face fell further when they found his unregistered weapon. Exactly what he had been reaching for during the confrontation. The woman's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Betty approached her with a fresh cup of coffee. "On the house," she insisted, her hands still slightly shaky, but her voice firm. "My late husband was a Marine. He would have loved to see this." The woman accepted the coffee with a grateful nod, understanding the deeper meaning behind Betty's words. The young biker, while being questioned by police, couldn't stop glancing at the woman. Finally, he gathered his courage and spoke up. "I never finished my military service," he admitted. "But seeing you today, maybe it's not too late to do something worthwhile with my life." The diner had become a buzz of activity. Officers taking statements, customers excitedly sharing their videos, and the cook making a fresh pot of coffee for everyone. Through it all, the woman maintained her quiet dignity, answering questions politely but briefly. A local news van pulled up outside. Someone had obviously called them. The woman gathered her riding gear, leaving a generous tip despite Betty's protests. She had never sought attention for her service, and she wasn't about to start now. Before she could leave, the family's daughter, about 7 years old, tugged at her jacket. "When I grow up," the little girl whispered, "I want to be strong like you." The woman knelt down to the child's level, her face softening. "You already are strong," she replied quietly. "Just remember to use that strength to protect others." The sun had fully set now, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. As the officers finished their paperwork and the excitement began to die down, the diner had transformed. It was no longer just another stop along the highway. It had become a place where people would tell the story for years to come. The story of what happened at the diner spread through the small town faster than a desert wildfire. By the next morning, the local newspaper had already posted the video online, and people couldn't stop talking about it. The elderly couple's recording had gone viral, showing the world how one person's quiet strength could change everything. At the police station, Bear and his gang members sat in holding cells, their tough guy images thoroughly deflated. The officers processing their paperwork couldn't help but smile every time they walked past. One of them had even printed out a photo from the diner's security camera and pinned it to the break room bulletin board. The most interesting change, though, was happening at the Veterans Center across town. The phone started ringing early that morning. Young women wanted to know about self-defense classes. Veterans called asking if they could volunteer. Even a few former troublemakers were asking about the rehabilitation program. The family from the diner had shared their story too. The little girl's drawings had made it to her school, where her teacher used them to start a discussion about real-life heroes. The class talked about courage, not just in fighting, but in standing up for what's right. One little boy raised his hand and said his mom had cried happy tears watching the video because his sister was joining the military next month. Back at the diner, Betty had hung a new sign in the window. "All heroes welcome." The cook had added a special to the menu called the Peacekeeper, a strong coffee served with a side of respect. Local bikers who stopped by made a point of being extra polite, not wanting to be confused with Bear's gang. The young biker who had recognized the woman's seal tattoo walked into the Veterans Center that afternoon. His hands were shaking as he filled out the program application, but the counselor just smiled and handed him a cup of coffee. "You're not the first to find your way here after taking a wrong turn," she said kindly. "And you won't be the last." On social media, the video had sparked something unexpected. People weren't just sharing it for the action. They were talking about second chances, about judging others too quickly, about the quiet heroes walking among us. Someone had even started a fundraiser to support women's military training programs. The local high school principal called an assembly. Without mentioning the violence, she talked about how one person's choice to stand up against bullying could inspire others. In the audience, several students sat up straighter, something changing in their eyes as they realized you didn't have to be the loudest to be the strongest. The woman herself was already miles away, unaware of the ripples she had created. But her impact remained, like rings spreading out from a stone dropped in still water. The diner had become a sort of unofficial landmark. Travelers would stop by, hoping to sit in that booth and hear the story firsthand from Betty. A small group of female veterans started meeting at the diner every Thursday morning. They'd share coffee and stories, offering support to anyone who needed it. Betty kept their cups full and listened to their conversations about service, sacrifice, and the changing world they helped create. The cook's daughter, the one serving in the army, called home after seeing the video. "Dad," she said, her voice proud, "that's exactly why I enlisted. Because of people like her, I got the chance to serve my country." The cook had to pretend he was chopping onions to explain his watery eyes. As the sun set on another day, Betty looked around her diner. The regular customers, the travelers passing through, the veterans gathering for coffee, they were all part of a bigger story now. a story about courage wearing a leather jacket, strength shown through kindness, and how sometimes the biggest changes start with one person simply doing what's right. 1 month after the incident at the diner, the changes in the small town were impossible to miss. The Veterans Center had doubled its class sizes, with people driving from neighboring towns to attend. The young biker had not only joined the program, but had brought 3 of his former gang members with him. They sat in the back row during classes, their leather jackets now clean of gang patches. Betty had transformed her diner into an unofficial meeting spot for local veterans. She'd put up a wall of photos showing service members from the community, and customers would often spend time looking at the faces of local heroes. The booth where everything had happened now had a small plaque that read, "Reserved for those who serve," though Betty insisted it wasn't about the woman specifically, but about what she represented. The local police department had started a community outreach program, inspired by how one person's calm approach had prevented what could have been a violent situation. They brought in veterans to teach conflict resolution, showing that true strength often meant knowing how to diffuse tension rather than escalate it. The little girl from that day had started a trend at her school. During show and tell, instead of bringing toys or vacation souvenirs, students began sharing stories about everyday heroes in their lives. The principal said she'd never seen the kids so engaged, especially when a student's grandmother came in to talk about her time as a military nurse. Word about the incident had reached military recruitment offices across the state. They reported a noticeable increase in women asking about service opportunities, particularly in specialized training programs. One recruiter said he kept a copy of the video on his phone, not for the action, but to show how training in composure could make all the difference. The cook's daughter had shared the story with her unit, and it had traveled through military circles. Female service members posted their own stories online, talking about the challenges they'd faced and overcome. The hashtag #QuietStrength had started trending, filled with messages of support and inspiration. In an unexpected turn, Bear's arrest had led to positive changes in the local biker community. The remaining riders had formed a new group focused on community service. They now escorted military funeral processions and organized rides to support veterans' causes. Their leather vests now bore patches reading "Guardians of Respect." The young biker who had recognized the woman's seal tattoo had become a regular volunteer at the Veterans Center. He worked with troubled teens, sharing his story of how one moment had changed his direction in life. "Sometimes you need to see someone else's light," he would tell them, "to find your own path." Betty had noticed other subtle changes in her diner. Travelers who stopped in were unfailingly polite. Local teenagers held doors open for elderly veterans. Even the rowdiest truck drivers lowered their voices when they noticed service members having coffee nearby. It was as if the whole place had absorbed a lesson in respect. The woman's story had made its way into the local school's curriculum, not as a tale of violence, but as a lesson in community impact. Teachers used it to discuss how one person's actions could create positive change, how strength could be shown through restraint, and how everyone had the potential to influence others for the better. Late one evening, as Betty was closing up, she found a handwritten note slipped under the door. It was from the woman, thanking her for keeping the story alive in the right way. Not as a tale of confrontation, but as a reminder of service, respect, and the power of standing up for others. Betty smiled and pinned the note to her wall of heroes, right in the center where everyone could see it. 3 months had passed since that memorable evening at the diner. The autumn air was getting crisp when a group of motorcycles rumbled into town again. But this time, they were different. The riders were veterans, women, and men who had organized a cross-country ride to raise awareness for female service members. They had specifically chosen to stop at Betty's diner, having heard the story that made it famous. The parking lot filled with bikes of all kinds, their chrome and paint gleaming in the afternoon sun. Among them was a familiar Triumph, and when its rider removed her helmet, Betty's face lit up with recognition. The woman had returned, though not for the attention. She was quietly leading the charity ride, helping other veterans find their voice and purpose. Inside, the diner buzzed with energy as riders shared stories over coffee and pie. The young biker who had changed his life was there too, now wearing a volunteer coordinator badge from the Veterans Center. He stood straighter now, pride having replaced his old slouch. When he saw his former mentor, they exchanged a simple nod that spoke volumes about the journey they'd both been on. The little girl from that first night came rushing in with her family, clutching a school project. She had written a report about community heroes and had won first place. The woman listened intently as the child proudly read it aloud, her voice clear and confident. The report wasn't just about that one evening. It was about how a single moment of courage could inspire others to be brave in their own ways. Betty had prepared for this day. She unveiled a new addition to her wall of heroes, a collection of letters from around the country. Veterans wrote out finding their strength, young women shared their dreams of military service, and community members described how the story had changed their perspective. The woman read them silently, her usually stoic expression softening at the impact her actions had created. The cook emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. His daughter was home on leave, proudly wearing her service uniform. She saluted the woman, not because of rank, but out of respect for what she represented. The woman returned the salute, creating a moment that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the diner. Local police officers stopped by throughout the day, not for crowd control, but to show support. The chief herself came in, sharing how the incident had changed their training programs. They now emphasized de-escalation and calm strength, understanding that true authority came from composure, not confrontation. As evening approached, the riders gathered outside for a group photo. The woman tried to stand in the back, but they gently pushed her to the center. Behind them, Betty's diner glowed warmly, its neon sign a beacon in the growing dusk. The photographer was the same elderly man who had recorded the original incident. He said he wouldn't have missed this reunion for the world. Just before they all rode out, something remarkable happened. Down the street came the sound of motorcycles, and around the corner appeared the reformed local bikers, their vests now bearing patches of service and respect. They lined up their bikes across the street, stood at attention, and raised their hands in salute as the veterans rode past. The woman was last to leave, pausing to hand Betty an envelope. Inside was an invitation to the opening of a new women's veteran support center in the next town over. None of this was just about me, she said quietly. It was about showing people that they're stronger than they think they are. As the sound of motorcycles faded into the distance, Betty looked around her diner. The place hadn't just witnessed history. It had become part of a continuing story about transformation, respect, and the quiet power of doing what's right. The evening sun caught the chrome of the last departing bikes, creating a kind of glory that felt both ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. 1 year had passed since that fateful evening at the diner. The small town had transformed in ways nobody could have predicted. The Women's Veteran Support Center was celebrating its first anniversary, and the parking lot was filled with both motorcycles and family cars. The woman who had started it all stood quietly near the entrance, watching as people gathered for the celebration. The young biker who had changed his life was now running his own mentorship program, helping other young people find better paths. He had traded his old leather jacket for a clean button-up shirt, though he still rode his motorcycle, now decorated with veteran support stickers. Today, he was giving a speech about second chances and the courage to change. Betty had closed the diner early to attend the celebration. Her wall of heroes had grown so large she had to expand it twice. But more importantly, her diner had become a symbol of transformation. Travelers from across the country would stop by, not just for the famous coffee, but to experience the atmosphere of respect and community that filled the place. The little girl, now a year older and even more confident, had started a school club called Future Leaders. They focused on community service and standing up for others. Today, she and her classmates were helping serve refreshments at the celebration, wearing t-shirts with quiet strength printed on the back. The police chief stood at the podium, sharing statistics that brought smiles to everyone's faces. Reports of harassment had dropped significantly in the past year. The reformed biker community had become partners in keeping the peace, their presence now welcoming rather than intimidating. She credited it all to learning that true strength comes in many forms. Inside the support center, walls were lined with photographs showing the journey of the past year. Women in uniform sharing their stories with wide-eyed teenagers. Veterans teaching self-defense classes to appreciative students. The young biker and his friends volunteering at community events. Each image told part of a larger story about transformation and hope. The cook from the diner had catered the event, and his daughter, now promoted in the military, helped serve the food. She had become a recruiter, using the story of that evening to show young women that they could be both strong and compassionate. Her father beamed with pride every time she shared her experiences. As the celebration continued, something unexpected happened. A group of tough-looking bikers rolled up, but instead of causing trouble, they parked respectfully and approached on foot. They were from a neighboring state, having heard the story and wanting to start similar community programs in their own town. The woman welcomed them with a firm handshake and an understanding nod. The elderly couple who had recorded the original video were there too, now running a social media channel dedicated to sharing positive stories about veterans and community heroes. They had become local celebrities in their own right, proving that age was no barrier to making a difference. Near sunset, everyone gathered for a group photo. The woman tried to step aside as usual, but this time, the little girl grabbed her hand and pulled her to the center. "Heroes shouldn't hide," she said with the innocent wisdom of childhood. The woman smiled, finally accepting that sometimes inspiring others means letting your light shine. As the day drew to a close, Betty placed a new sign in her diner's window, "Where everyday heroes meet." The woman read it and nodded, understanding that the real story wasn't about one evening of excitement, but about how a single moment of standing up for what's right can create endless ripples of positive change. The sun set on the celebration, painting the sky in brilliant colors, but the real beauty was in the faces of the people gathered there, each one carrying a piece of the story, each one changed in their own way by witnessing what quiet strength and unwavering principles could achieve. The legacy wasn't just about one woman's actions anymore. It had become about an entire community discovering its own capacity for transformation and growth.